The German pilot had almost used up his ammo. The P-47 Thunderbolt ahead of him should have been falling from the sky. His wingmen had already made 2 passes, their 20mm cannons tearing into the massive American fighter. He pulled closer. Through the oil-smeared cockpit, the American pilot was still fighting the controls of a smoking airframe with over 200 holes. Another burst from his wingmen went right into the engine. The propeller stuttered, caught, and stuttered again. He'd seen Spitfires fold from half this damage. Mustangs turned into fireballs. But this 7-ton monster kept grinding through the sky. While every other nation built dogfighting dancers, the Americans had built a bulldozer with wings. The P-47's unlikely journey began in the 1920s with 2 Russian émigrés. Alexander Seversky, a World War I pilot turned engineer, founded the Seversky Aircraft Corporation in 1922 with a clear mission: build modern fighters that could compete globally. His protege, Alexander Kartveli, would push this vision beyond conventional limits. Seversky's early designs showed promise, but fell short when tested against reality. The P-35, America's first fighter with retractable landing gear, represented a leap in aerodynamic efficiency, but lacked the power and armament needed for modern combat. The follow-up P-43 Lancer, with its pressurized cockpit aimed at high-altitude performance, suffered from the same fundamental weaknesses: insufficient firepower, inadequate armor, and engines that couldn't match European competition. Such flaws might have been excused in peacetime or colonial skirmishes, but Europe was ablaze, and falling behind now meant defeat. The German blitzkrieg over Poland and France shattered any lingering illusions about what air combat demanded. In swift, coordinated strikes, the Luftwaffe demonstrated that modern war would be won by speed, altitude, and overwhelming firepower, not just maneuverability. German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 dominated the skies with advanced engines, tight formations, and aggressive tactics that overwhelmed slower, underpowered opposition. Meanwhile, American fighter designs still relied on outdated doctrines to prioritize short-range interceptors with limited firepower and weak survivability. When U.S. observers analyzed the wreckage left in the Luftwaffe's wake, it became clear their existing fighters wouldn't survive a second in that kind of airspace. Aircraft like the P-36 Hawk or Seversky P-35, light, underarmed, and built for peacetime assumptions, were suddenly obsolete. Needed to throw out the rulebook and rethink what a modern fighter had to be. Something that could climb fast, strike hard, take hits, and still bring its pilot home. Kartveli knew the era of the lightweight dogfighter was over. When critics questioned the design's bulk, Kartveli responded with characteristic bluntness, quote, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The U.S. Army Air Corps took an unprecedented gamble in June 1940, ordering 773 P-47s before the prototypes made in flight. This leap of faith acknowledged the desperate need for a combat-capable fighter that could outgun and outlast enemy aircraft. The P-47 Thunderbolt was unlike any fighter before it, a 12,000-pound juggernaut that pilots nicknamed the Jug because its broad fuselage, when stood on its tail, resembled an old-fashioned milk jug. Where contemporaries like the Spitfire, Messerschmitt Bf 109, or P-51 Mustang emphasized agility and grace, the Thunderbolt brought overwhelming firepower and unmatched durability to the battlefield. However, its bulk and toughness demanded an engine with the muscle to match. That engine was the R-2800 Double Wasp, the mechanical heart that defined everything about the Thunderbolt's character. This 18-cylinder air-cooled radial could be pushed to 2,300 horsepower in later variants, representing the absolute pinnacle of piston engine technology. But raw power meant nothing without the ability to breathe at altitude. The Thunderbolt's complex turbo-supercharger system was an engineering marvel that gave it dominance above 27,000 feet. Air entered through a massive intake beneath the engine, so large a man could fit inside, then traveled to the aircraft's rear, where it split into 2 paths. One stream was compressed by the supercharger impeller, while the other was cooled by an intercooler. This compressed cool air then returned to feed the engine cylinders, allowing the R-2800 to maintain power at altitudes where other fighters gasped for oxygen. Exhaust gases spun a turbine at 21,300 RPMs at full throttle, powering the supercharger through carefully gated nozzles that adjusted performance for different altitudes. This intricate system made the P-47 the fastest Army Air Forces fighter at altitude when it entered service, often exceeding 400 miles per hour in level flight. Later variants added even more sophisticated systems. The P-47 D4 introduced water alcohol injection, carrying 30 gallons of a special mixture that, when sprayed into the engine intake, cooled incoming air through evaporation. This increased air density and prevented pre-ignition, providing crucial bursts of extra horsepower during emergencies, the difference between escape and capture at 25,000 feet. The revolutionary Curtiss Electric four-bladed paddle prop propeller arrived with the P-47 D-22, its larger blades grabbing more air and dramatically improving climb rates at lower altitudes. German pilots who'd grown accustomed to escaping Thunderbolts in steep climbs suddenly found themselves caught off guard as the Jug pursued with renewed vigor, turning the tables on tactics that had once provided sanctuary. The P-47's reputation wasn't built solely on engineering excellence. It was the devastating armament that truly set it apart from every other fighter in the sky. 8 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns, mounted 4 in each wing, created a concentrated storm of metal that could shred enemy aircraft with terrifying efficiency. This staggered gun arrangement wasn't just clever engineering. It allowed side-by-side ammunition boxes, each holding over 350 rounds, creating a weapon system that could sustain fire far longer than competitors. When all 8 guns fired simultaneously, they unleashed roughly 100 rounds per second, a blistering hail of bullets unmatched by any other single-engine fighter in World War II. This firepower could tear through Japanese fighters, which were lightly armored compared to their Western counterparts, like tissue paper. Even heavy bombers found themselves vulnerable to the relentless bullet streams that could saw wings off and explode fuel tanks through sustained bursts. Ground targets proved equally helpless against this aerial artillery. Pilots discovered they could blast aside railroad cars with concentrated fire, while strafing runs left airfields and infrastructure in ruins. The psychological effect was equally powerful. The distinctive sound of 8 50 calibers firing in unison became synonymous with American air power. The P-47 Thunderbolt's combat debut in late 1942 with the 56th Fighter Group in England marked the beginning of a rocky relationship between American pilots and their massive new mount. The 4th Fighter Group, formed from former RAF Eagle Squadron veterans, also transitioned to Thunderbolts in early 1943, bringing expectations shaped by nimble Spitfires to an aircraft that seemed built for different purposes entirely. Initial reactions ranged from skepticism to outright hostility. Pilots accustomed to dancers found themselves strapped into what felt like flying anvils. The Jug's size invited mockery, and early models drew harsh criticism for sluggish climb rates and poor turning performance. Don Blakesley, destined to become a legendary ace, captured the prevailing mood with typical bluntness, quote, "It ought to be able to dive. It certainly can't climb." Spring 1943's early missions provided a brutal education in modern air combat. Mechanical issues plagued new aircraft, while crews struggled to master the Thunderbolt's unique characteristics, all while facing the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots, flying Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The results were sobering. More P-47s were lost than German aircraft claimed during the first 2 months of operations, shaking confidence in both machine and mission. But gradually, adaptation replaced frustration. Pilots began appreciating the Jug's incredible toughness, devastating firepower, and surprising speed advantages. This growing understanding led to revolutionary tactical innovations, tailored specifically to the Thunderbolt's strengths, rather than fighting against its limitations. The breakthrough came when pilots embraced hit-and-run tactics that exploited the P-47's excellent roll rate and unmatched high-altitude performance. Attacking from above, they would dive into enemy formations, unleash bursts of gunfire from 8 50 calibers, then use their speed advantage to escape before opponents could react effectively. German tactics inadvertently played into this approach, as Luftwaffe pilots focused on protecting bombers, often avoiding direct engagement with escorts. Once a Thunderbolt built speed in a dive, it became nearly impossible to catch. German ace Kurt Bulligan expressed, quote, "We discovered not to dive away from P-47s." As pilots perfected hit-and-run tactics, the Thunderbolt evolved from an outlier into a frontline weapon. But it was the plane's legendary durability that truly won their devotion. Widely regarded as the toughest fighter ever built, the P-47 could absorb tremendous battle damage and continue flying. The air-cooled radial engine proved far more resilient than fragile liquid-cooled power plants, tolerating damage that would ground other aircraft immediately. The wing structure itself provided remarkable protection, reinforced by thick ducting for the turbo supercharger that doubled as armor against enemy fire. Self-sealing fuel tanks reduced explosion risks, while armored plating shielded pilots from frontal and rear attacks. The extensive internal ducting cushioned impacts, and the P-47's smooth belly design minimized chances of flipping during crash landings, a feature that saved countless pilot lives. Stories circulated of Thunderbolts and their variants returning with foot-wide holes in their engines, 2 cylinders destroyed, or collision damage from trees that would have been fatal to lighter fighters. Ground crews often posed for photographs, with their heads poking through flak holes scattered across wings, a testament to the Jug's incredible toughness. One pilot, Clayton Gross of the 354th Fighter Group, recalled strafing a German train and watching with grim satisfaction as he, quote, tipped the boxcar over on its side, not exploded, just tipped it over from the impact of the tremendous firepower. That was the kind of brute energy you got from the 850 caliber machine guns on a P-47. Yet there was a day when Gross found himself on the receiving end of that same unstoppable force. Flying a P-51 Mustang, Gross came suddenly under fire, not from enemies, but from a flight of P-47 Thunderbolts, who mistook his aircraft for a Messerschmitt Bf-109. Without warning, the juggernauts opened up. His canopy shattered instantly, ripped away in the first burst, yanking his aircraft into a violent snap roll. Fighting desperately, Gross regained control, just as the Thunderbolts circled for another pass. Desperate, he rocked his wings to signal he was friendly. One pilot recognized the mistake, pulled alongside, and then peeled away. Gross limped home to find his Mustang riddled with nearly 100 bullet holes. Some neat entry wounds, others ragged exits. The Mustang looked like it had been blasted apart from every angle. By all rights, it should have been totaled. The P-51 didn't have the same armor or thick skin as the Thunderbolt, but its solid construction, along with a bit of sheer luck, was just enough. The radio still worked. The controls still responded. The airframe held together. Gross was lucky to walk away at all, and that was the brutal reality of facing the P-47's overwhelming firepower. The Jug didn't just survive the skies, it dominated them. But that reputation didn't come overnight. By 1943, the P-47 Thunderbolt had become the spearhead of a relentless campaign that would ultimately shatter the Luftwaffe's control over European skies. As the U.S. 8th Air Force escalated daylight strategic bombing over occupied Europe, Thunderbolts found themselves at the center of an air war that would determine the continent's fate. But early limitations nearly derailed this mission. The P-47's massive R-2800 engine consumed fuel voraciously, and without external tanks, the aircraft couldn't escort bombers deep into German territory. Luftwaffe fighters quickly learned to shadow the Thunderbolts, waiting until fuel concerns forced them to turn homeward before launching attacks on unprotected bomber formations. The solution arrived with the P-47 D-15 variant, capable of carrying 2 wing-mounted 108-gallon drop tanks, plus an additional belly tank. This modification dramatically extended the Thunderbolt's reach, allowing escorts to accompany bombers as far as Frankfurt and Hamburg. While the later P-51 Mustang's superior range would eventually shift primary escort duties, the Jug remained absolutely vital to the air campaign's success. Throughout 1943 and 44, relentless bombing raids forced the Luftwaffe into increasingly desperate battles, cutting down Germany's shrinking pool of veteran pilots with every engagement. The Luftwaffe could replace aircraft from factories, but experience took years to develop, time Germany no longer possessed. Each mission saw Thunderbolts testing, matching, and systematically wearing down opposition through sheer attrition. No unit embodied this grinding campaign better than the 56th Fighter Group, known throughout the European theater as Zemke's Wolfpack. Refusing orders to transition to the P-51 Mustang, the 56th remained loyal to their Jugs throughout the war, ultimately becoming the top-scoring air-to-air unit in the 8th Air Force. Their pilots accumulated 677.5 aerial victories and 311 ground victories, a record built on the Thunderbolt's unique combination of firepower and survivability. Individual aces emerged from this crucible, their names becoming synonymous with American air power. Francis Gabby Gabreski claimed 28 victories. Robert S. Johnson achieved 27, and group leader Hubert Zemke tallied 17.75 confirmed victories. These men proved that the Thunderbolt, despite its bulk and unconventional design, could dominate even the most advanced German fighters when flown with skill and determination. The P-47 even proved effective against cutting-edge German technology, with Thunderbolt pilots claiming 20 victories against the jet-powered Me-262 and 4 against the Arado AR-234 jet bomber. On the ground, their strafing runs systematically destroyed airfields and infrastructure, turning the Luftwaffe's strategic retreat into a complete rout. By mid-1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had evolved far beyond its original escort fighting role, transforming into the USAAF's premier ground attack aircraft, an aerial juggernaut that struck from low altitude with raw violence and terrifying frequency. Pilots began calling it, quote, the Warthog of World War II. This nickname acknowledged both its ungainly appearance and unmatched ability to devastate German convoys, armor columns, and supply lines. The Thunderbolt's robust construction and powerful wings allowed it to carry up to 2,500 pounds of external ordnance, an extraordinary load for a single-engine fighter. Standard configurations included 2 500-pound general-purpose bombs, clusters of anti-personnel fragmentation bombs, or single 1,000-pound bombs for hardened targets. Against hardened targets, like rail tunnels or bridges, where traditional dive bombing often proved ineffective, Thunderbolt pilots perfected a tactic known as skip bombing. Instead of dropping bombs from altitude, they attacked at treetop level, releasing their ordnance at high speed so it would skip across the ground or water like a stone. With precise aim, the bomb would ricochet off the surface and slam directly into a tunnel entrance or under a bridge span, detonating deep inside the structure where it could do the most damage. It was high-risk, high-reward flying, but with the P-47's rugged build and sheer speed, it became one of the most effective ways to neutralize critical infrastructure. The aircraft's destructive capability increased exponentially with the introduction of the 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rocket, nicknamed Holy Moses for its biblical impact. These unguided rockets packed the explosive power of 105mm artillery shells, and up to 10 could be mounted under the wings. Though early accuracy proved problematic, pilots quickly adapted, firing rockets in pairs or full salvos to saturate target areas. When launched from shallow dives, these weapons could split railway cars, crack open tanks, and leave entire enemy columns burning. Supporting tactics evolved alongside the aircraft's capabilities. Forward air controllers, operating from jeeps or tanks, maintained direct radio contact with patrolling Thunderbolts, calling in strikes on dug-in troops, artillery positions, or moving convoys with unprecedented precision. Newly constructed advanced landing grounds, like the facility at Saint-Pierre-du-Mont, positioned Thunderbolts close to active combat zones, reducing transit time and allowing extended loiter periods over battlefields. From D-Day through VE Day, Thunderbolt groups systematically crippled German logistics networks. They destroyed an estimated 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. During Operation Cobra, the 405th Fighter Group alone destroyed a German column, taking out 66 tanks and over 200 other vehicles in a single engagement. Across France and into Germany itself, the distinctive growl of Thunderbolt engines overhead meant one thing to enemy forces: the roads were no longer safe. The Pacific Theater initially posed seemingly insurmountable challenges for the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Its massive R-2800 engine and thick fuselage created a fuel consumption rate that made long-range missions impractical in a war where targets were scattered across thousands of ocean miles. The leaner P-38 Lightning and later P-51 Mustang became preferred choices for extended escort duties, but this didn't relegate the Jug to irrelevance. On October 11, 1943, in the skies above Wewak, New Guinea, Colonel Neil Kirby led 4 P-47 Thunderbolts into the teeth of a storm. Below them, the Japanese airfield at Wewak swarmed to life. 40 enemy fighters clawed upward to intercept, mostly Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars and Kawasaki Ki-61 Tonys. Light, fast climbing, and highly maneuverable. The Oscar in particular was a tight-turning, featherweight dogfighter with twin 12 7mm guns and paper-thin skin. The Tony was sleeker, faster and better armed, closer in spirit to Western designs. The Thunderbolt was the opposite, twice the weight, almost 3 times the engine power, and built like a flying tank. It couldn't match their turn radius, but in a dive, it was unstoppable, and it packed 8 Brownings. Kirby knew the numbers. He attacked anyway. He dove straight through the formation, machine guns blazing. One Oscar folded in half under the barrage. Another exploded in midair. He didn't wait. He climbed back up, rolled over, and dove again. One Tony tried to outrun him and got shredded from tail to nose. The others tried to turn inside him. Kirby met them head-on and blew them out of the sky. By the time it ended, 6 enemy fighters had fallen, all to Kirby. It was the single most destructive P-47 engagement in the Pacific to that point, and it earned him the Medal of Honor. But sadly, 5 months later, he would vanish over the same battlefield, his Thunderbolt trailing smoke into the jungle. Other Pacific commands had mixed experiences with the Thunderbolt. Claire Chennault's 14th Air Force in China rejected the P-47 almost immediately, as fuel supply challenges made the aircraft's consumption rate logistically impossible. However, in Burma, with better infrastructure and close targets, the P-47 found its rhythm as a ruthless fighter bomber, systematically destroying bridges, strafing convoys, and hammering retreating Japanese units. The Thunderbolt's most dramatic Pacific moment came during the Battle of the Marianas. To get P-47s into the fight on Saipan fast, the 318th Fighter Group faced a daunting challenge. These massive Thunderbolts had never launched from aircraft carriers before. June 22, 1944, on the decks of USS Manila Bay and USS Natoma Bay, the pilots lined up their bulky P-47s, engines roaring against the confined space. The catapults trembled under the weight of the powerful aircraft, designed for runways, not wooden carrier decks. One by one, the Thunderbolts were launched into the sky. Each takeoff was a gamble. Too slow, and the plane risked falling into the sea. Too fast, and the fragile carrier deck risked damage. But every aircraft cleared the decks flawlessly, a feat never before attempted in aviation history. Hours later, those same Thunderbolts touched down at the hastily repaired Isley Field, ready to dive into the brutal island-hopping battles. From that day, the P-47s provided relentless close air support over Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, proof that bold innovation could turn the tide. That same week marked the first combat use of napalm, as ground crews rigged external drop tanks with thickened gasoline. When dropped by P-47s over Japanese positions, they exploded in sheets of fire, an innovation that would permanently change air-to-ground warfare. By December 1945, the final P-47 rolled off production lines, completing a staggering total of 15,683 aircraft, the largest number of any American-built fighter in history. Though the war had ended, the Thunderbolt, redesignated F-47 in 1947, served in U.S. front lines until 1949 and with the Air National Guard until 1953. Flying reconnaissance escort, search and rescue, and counterinsurgency missions where its rugged build and easy upkeep excelled. The Korean War ended the Thunderbolt's American combat career. Though its toughness suited close air support, plentiful F-51 Mustangs from wartime stockpiles kept the Thunderbolt sidelined during the conflict. Internationally, the P-47's story continued far longer. During World War II, the Thunderbolt served widely, the RAF in Burma until 1946, Free French in Europe, Brazilians earning a presidential unit citation in Italy, and Mexico's 201st Squadron flying over the Philippines without a single combat loss. The Soviet Union accepted Thunderbolts primarily for high-altitude defense roles, though operational differences limited their frontline utility. Post-war exports kept the Thunderbolt flying into the 1960s, with Italy, Turkey, Iran, China, Yugoslavia, and many Latin American nations. In Italy, it bridged piston fighters and early jets like the F-84. Despite its reach and achievements, the P-47 faded from memory, eclipsed by the sleeker P-51's image. Its true strength was close air support and ground attack, vital to victory, but less celebrated than Europe's air-to-air duels. However, its most enduring legacy emerged decades later in the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II. Purpose-built for ground attack, the A-10 was built on the P-47's combat lessons. bigger gun, improved armor, same brutal mission. Its GAU-8A cannon and pilot-protecting titanium bathtub directly descended from the Thunderbolt's ground attack innovations. The P-47 Thunderbolt's brute force and battlefield resilience reshaped how air power could be used, blending speed, firepower, and survivability in ways few had imagined. Its legacy didn't end in 1945. The tactics it pioneered and the combat roles it mastered laid the groundwork for a new generation of close air support doctrine, one that would resurface decades later in the form of the A-10 Thunderbolt II. But by then, air combat itself had evolved, and the world would demand something even more precise, more surgical, and just as unshakable.